Former Prime Minister of England, Harold Macmillan, once wrote, "History is apt to judge harshly those who sacrifice tomorrow for today." Last week's reading talked about the widow's mite, the 2 small coins that Jesus saw the poor widow put in to the treasury. That marked the last time that Jesus was in the temple. And that's tied into the beginning of today's gospel. For the first 2 lines of that gospel culminate the previous 2 chapters in the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus was taking on the elders in the temple, challenging them. It's interesting in this passage because this statement that is made in verse 2 is one that the elders, while they twisted it, used it to accuse him, to jail him, and ultimately to hang him on the cross. Now, they twisted the words, but this passage crosses over in history. In fact, the people that came by, as we're told in the Gospel of Mark, came by and mocked him about those stones being brought down by him, even though it was a statement that he never truly made. This other passage from Daniel, and even the epistle, is a little bit foreboding. What is to come, signs of things to come, hard realities of what is to come. And when I started to look at the 3 passages together, while the gospel is very familiar, I thought that Hebrews gives us some insight on how we are to love as Christians. You see, it mentions love and good deeds and frequent assembly. But the love that is talked about in this Hebrews passage is more not something you feel, but something you do. It's the verb love. It's the action of love. It seeks for the well-being of others and is expressed in concrete efforts on others' behalf. That is the Christian love, the caritas, as it were, that we should look towards. It also offers good deeds. And the third part, which is also important, is frequent assembly. Frequent assembly, but not for assembly's sake, not just gathering together. And by the way, check the box, you're all doing that. Hopefully as frequently as possible. But that idea of coming together not as a requirement, but as a way to approach what Jesus was trying to teach and what he was, in a sense, fighting with the elders about. We are to support and provoke one another. Usually, provoking is negative. But in this case, it's the idea that it's a model of self-giving and doing for others that we should follow, that Christ showed and did before they accused him of threatening the temple. This kind of love, as it was pointed out, is something that can be stimulated, commanded even provoked and encouraged. That is why we assemble. We assemble to worship God, but we also assemble, as Hebrews points out, in true heart and mind for each other. The absence of some means that we don't gain the benefit of their insight and support, but it also means they may not gain or glean from each and every one of us who are gathered here. This is something that is oftentimes neglected, looked at as a requirement, and it's not meant to be work. It's meant to be supportive and helpful. It's why we use our time and our talent and our treasure and support this place in our ministries that we do once we leave this place. We gain that support. We gain that provoking from each other, that encouragement of what others are doing and how we can glean support and love in action. And then learn how, when others leave this place, they are going to serve God in actions. Whether it's through the ministries here already, which so many of you, as I look around, serve so diligently. Many of you, as I've said before, I don't even know some of the ministries you're doing in your own humility. But it builds me up to know all the work that we've done. We just completed a forum hour that, unfortunately, Vicki Lane, who was the purchaser of the house we helped build with Habitat for Humanity, did come and speak to us. I was hoping she'd be with us, but not only did she get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do her job, she also had a cold, and she was struggling to finish the presentation, but she promised to come back. But her coming built me up. It encouraged me because I learned a little bit more about what she does in the community with addiction. This is the kind of love that we are called to in Hebrews, but we are called to over and over again. That passage from Hebrews also references back to Jeremiah, that middle section of Jeremiah that talks about the Spirit and love and empowering us. That is the love that we should show for one another, that we should support in one another. We come here to build ourselves up, to worship, but the idea is to learn and grow and go out into the world and serve that love in action. If the elders had taken maybe from Harold Macmillan about history and their harsh sacrifice of tomorrow for today, if they maybe looked back at all those passages prior that Jesus taught from about loving and serving one another, about growing closer to God, they may not have been so harsh in their treatment of him. They were so concerned with the what, not the why, that it carried them away. They were not gathering together and looking at the opportunity of how they could serve God, but preventing, sacrificing tomorrow for today. We must continue to read, mark, and inwardly digest these scriptures because they teach us from the beginnings of the Torah forward on those things that we need to do for one another in the building up of one another. And we do it because we have the hope of what is to come, the promise that Jesus made and continues to make. In a final point, Jesus also uses the imagery of birth pains because no one knows when they start, when they will actually end. He didn't give a conclusive answer. Like the birth of a child, when it begins, it begins. When it ends, well, it's up to God. And we rejoice when the birth comes. And that's the rejoice that we can have hope in. Because when that time comes, we will be with God. And our hope can rely on that. So in between, we need to show our love in provoking and encouraging each other to action. As a final word, Harold Macmillan also said, too many people live too much in the past. The past history must be a springboard, not a sofa. Amen.